Welcome to the next in our State of the EVs in the UK interviews 2020. And this time I'm talking to a relative newcomer to the field of EVs, but who has a lot of knowledge from another field entirely, and he's bringing it to bear. Hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Joined today by James Wehner from Engenie. Good to see you, James.
Good to meet you, Gary. How are you doing?
I'm good. So last year I spoke to Dora about how you were getting on with everything, and Dora was talking about some pretty exciting plans for expansion. And I just wondered, obviously this year's been challenging. We've had the whole COVID thing. So how have you been getting on with that?
I think we've done pretty well. I mean, prior to me joining, I think this time last year we had around 20 locations.
Yeah.
And now we're at we hit our 100 mark a couple of weeks ago, and we're now at well over 150 charge points. So it's pretty good growth, and the curve is continuing to go in that same direction. So it looks like the rest of 2020 is going to be busy. 2021 is going to be busier still. So exciting times, definitely.
So most of those chargers you put in are they still 50 kilowatt chargers? Any plans for anything faster than that?
So a majority are 50 kilowatts at the moment. We base our installs really on what those sites look like and what's most appropriate based on the dwell time, etc. So because a lot of the sites we work on at the moment are focused around restaurants, pubs, places where you like to stay sort of an hour, maybe hour and a half, that's the most appropriate for that kind of a site. However, we've got some work in the pipeline for some of the ultra rapids for places where that dwell time is going to be a lot shorter.
Okay,
so watch this space.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Absolutely makes total sense, and I think that's what Dora said last year, and I totally agree with that. And it's interesting some of the places you've actually installed at. You've done some deals with shopping centres recently, which I think is a very good place as well for a longer dwell time. That makes perfect sense. One question I keep getting asked by people is around the installed chargers, and this is something you guys seem to be really good at, but a lot of people see chargers go in and then they sit and wait for a year before they actually go live, and yours seem to go live quite quickly. So how are you managing that?
Maybe it's just because we're just much better than everybody else. I think what it is, the way we line everything up. So we have in-house based project management teams. So we make sure that everything is lined up and ready to go. So it all hits that sweet spot at the same time, which means that once we've built that charger and put it into the ground, by the time we've done that, the grid is ready, the meters are ready, and everything's ready for it to be switched on, usually within a few days of us completing construction.
So I mean, there's all sorts of challenges there, aren't there? Because you've got to get a local connection, you've got to get planning permission, and all that stuff. So bringing all that together is a real challenge. But yeah, you do seem to do it very successfully.
Well, that's the advantage of having a lot of this skill set in-house, and making sure that where we do partner with external companies, we partner with the right people who are able to deliver to our standards. So.
That's good. So you've fairly recently joined Engenie and come on with a fairly specific remit, and that's actually one of the things I really want to talk about today, because one of my pet things at the moment is the usability and ease of usability of chargers, and I think you've got some. Or lack of yeah. And that's something I think you've basically come on board to try. So do you want to give people a little bit of your background and why you should be quite good at this?
Yeah, so I think the key thing is that prior to joining Engenie, the last 5 years of my life were spent at McDonald's, which probably needs no introduction. And my role there was global product manager for the in-store kiosks. Essentially what that meant was I was responsible for refining and building a brand new user interface on those big touchscreen kiosks to make it easier for people to order a burger, for a better phrase. But I spent a lot of time and have spent most of my career looking at problems that customers or human beings face and then finding appropriate solutions to that. So it's never about the technology, despite my title. But it's always about the human being and finding the most appropriate solution. And luckily for me, technology is often part of that solution. But I think the key thing that we do, and one of the reasons I was excited to join Engenie when talking to the team here, is that when you put your customer first, you end up creating a much better solution. And there's some recent things that have been done, such as there was a big problem, not a problem, a confusion over our pre-authorization of £29 when you tap the card reader. So we've worked very hard with our payment providers to understand how we can build a new solution to that. And this week we will be introducing the £5 pre-authorization, which means that pain point is taken away. Yeah. So it's things like that. Now, that's not a particularly technical solution, although technology is involved, but it's answering a human problem, which was the confusion and of taking £29 or reserving £29 from somebody's account when they maybe only need a £5, £6, £7 charge to their vehicle.
Yeah. And that makes perfect sense. I mean, some of your competitors take even more than that, which is can put people in quite financial straits if they're doing a long journey.
Well, that's it. I think if you take it to that human level, if I have got a car and I'm pulling in, let's use a good example. I'm pulling in at a fast food restaurant to buy some lunch. I maybe have £20 in my account. That's enough to put £5 in my car and get myself some lunch and still have some left over. And if you take that full amount out as a pre-auth on the card, I now can't buy my lunch. So yeah, it suddenly becomes a very real problem, which on the surface of it, when you develop these systems, you don't think about necessarily. But when you actually look at it from the other side, it's a real issue, and it's something that we should be heavily focused on.
So as I said, I've got a real focus.
I've got Siri was talking.
No worries. I've got a real focus on chargers at the moment, and one of the things that's sort of keeps coming back up is the easy use of the actual chargers themselves. I do a lot of introductory talks to people who've just, particularly on the iPost owner group, where people have just picked up their iPost, and the question always comes back about, why do I have to have so many cards? Why do I have to have? Why is it so complex to use chargers? And I know that's something you've got a real focus on as well. But it's a big challenge, isn't it? Because the chargers are all different. They all come from different manufacturers. The manufacturers have got a lot of influence over it as well. So it's a challenge.
It's a huge challenge, and I genuinely don't understand why it has to be so difficult. I mean, you don't have to have 17 different cards to put your fossil fuels into your dinosaur burning vehicle. So why should you have to do that when you're filling up your EV? And yeah, there are a lot of initiatives going on at the moment around interoperability and making sure that you can have a single way of accessing your charge points or all charge points. Engenie were very forward thinking with this from the very beginning. So we've always had card readers on the devices so that you can use a bank card to pay. So you don't need a subscription, you don't need an account, you don't need any of these things. You just turn up, tap, pay, off you go. But additionally, there are a lot of operators out there that don't have that. And there are opportunities there to partner with those operators so that our users can use their chargers and their users can use our chargers. And we're doing a lot of talk around that at the moment, around making sure that we are working in an interoperability model so that it makes it easier for our customers. So they don't need 20 RFID cards. They can use one RFID card and it will work wherever they want. And we're also looking at ways that we can actually make it even easier for a customer. So if they do want to use a particular app or a particular RFID card, how can we make it so they can register that with an Engenie account? So they maybe have 5 accounts because they get some preferential rates or what have you, but they only have one way of interacting with all the charge points.
Which is a really good idea. And also, I think there's a lot of focus on contactless, but one of the things I've learned from doing these interviews is that the fleets don't really want to go with contactless. It's very difficult for them to manage. So having some sort of RFID card actually works well for the business fleets. Exactly.
And yeah, if you do have a fleet, or if you're a hire car company, how do you tell somebody who's never driven an EV before, here's your 17 RFID cards, and when you need to put more electricity in the car, you just have to choose the right one. So yeah, I think it's all around that. It's from a technical perspective, problem solved. I have a card and I can charge my vehicle. From a human perspective, I've got a deck of cards that I don't know what any of them do and who they're for and all these other things. Yeah. So focus on the human problem. I want to charge my vehicle and then make technology work around that.
Yeah, and I'm totally with you on the complexity of charging and why is it not as simple as using a petrol station. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when petrol stations themselves were complex, and you actually had to have operators to actually operate them because you had to pull levers and all sorts of things to do. So it does evolve over time. Hopefully, things do get simpler. I think one of the frustrations with the actual devices, the actual charge units, is the fact they're all different and they all work differently, and there's every single one seems to have a different routine you have to do to actually get the charge to work, and a lot of them rely on screens, and certainly in the weather we've been having recently, those screens are quite challenging to work with. So you've got the problems of reflection, because we get a lot of bright sunlight when it is bright, or you've got rain, which makes it very difficult.
Yeah.
So it's just those screens. And I mean, one of the things I've often gone about is the fact we don't have any sort of canopy over or cover over the chargers. And I know there's a lot of issues with that with planning permission and the like. I do find it odd that we haven't even thought of having some sort of little hood over the actual screen, because that would actually make it easier to see the screens a lot of the time. But I guess the question is really, do we actually need to have the screens for interaction at all? Can we make it simple enough that people don't even have to think about how they operate this, just tap and go effectively?
Yeah, I think there is a definite argument that the screens are, I wouldn't say superfluous to requirements, but there is definitely an opportunity to reduce the reliance on them, and maybe they become more informational than interactive. As you say, if I can just turn up and tap an RFID card on my bank card, great. If I want to use my account, then I should be able to do that. And I think where you get the challenge is where you're selecting the exact charge cable or connector that you want to use. And that's where the screen comes in on our chargers at the moment, is making sure that you've unlocked the right one.
Yeah, because yours are actually unusual, and actually you lock the cable in, don't you, until someone presses the button to say release it.
We do, and that's mostly for a hardware protection reason. We don't really want the cables dangling around on the ground. We don't really want people playing with them when it's not there. They can get damaged, etc. But at the same time, appreciate that that's not necessarily the easiest way of using it. So we are looking at how we make that easier to use, and potentially, do we need to select the cable, or do we unlock all the cables as soon as you've tapped your card, and then we work out which one you're using because you've plugged it into the vehicle? So it should be that there are definite things that we can work on, and we're looking at all these options at the moment.
Because obviously the cables all have signal pins which allow you to tell you've plugged it into the car, so you should be able to work it out technically.
Yeah, I mean, it's clever stuff. It talks to the car. It knows how much it's drawing. It knows all sorts of other things, like the percentage state of the battery. So yeah, it's not too complex to fix, but there are a number of moving parts from the hardware manufacturer through to the back office software and back down to the app and things. So
one of the things I also talked to Dora last year about was the whole concept of plug and charge or auto charge, which is something I'm quite a big fan of. I've used it on Fastned, which have implemented their own solution for it. I know it's part of the CCS standard going forward, but that introduces its own challenges if you're locking the cables, because you obviously can't. You need to release the cables.
Exactly. And again, there is definitely something there that we need to look at. But I mean, I'm actually quite excited about that coming in. I've got a lot of interesting thoughts and plans around that when it's fully adopted. But I think, again, when plug and charge comes in, you're still going to have to get out of the vehicle to start the charge. So even if there's just a big button that you press that says unlock cables, it's there are simple, if not particularly elegant solutions to that. And then beyond that, there will be simple and elegant solutions to it. But yeah, it's definitely something we're talking about with our suppliers at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that has challenges anyway. Because if you're doing physical things, you've got to replace all the chargers, which is I assume a large capital cost. You're not going to want to do too quick often.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are other concerns or things to think about around there, but again, it all comes back to what works best for the customer, what works best for the driver, and sometimes there are costs involved in doing that, but you absorb that because it means that moving forwards it's a better experience.
And I know from talking to lots of drivers that the ease of use drives which chargers you go to now. We're getting a choice of chargers now in a lot of locations, and I mean I know I will look out for Engenie chargers because I know they'll work like it's reliable. So which some of the other networks aren't. But I do sometimes find the ease of use challenging. Sometimes it's difficult to get the order right to actually get the car to start charging properly. So I think I'm really looking forward to when you improve that. That's going to be good. So one of the other things which comes up a lot on Engenie is your app, or in terms of the usability on that.
Yeah, and so interestingly, you may or may not have noticed, if you go to download the app on the App Store, you'll find it's no longer there.
Yeah.
There's a good reason for that. We acknowledged that it was not the greatest experience. It came as part of a package with our back office software, and we are currently in the process of redeveloping that from the ground up. So later on this year, we will be introducing a new app. The important thing about it is that it will be, firstly, a lot easier to use, but secondly, will be a 100% an Engenie app, which will be focused on customers, focused on making sure we're delivering what our drivers ask us for, and not necessarily what our suppliers tell us we should be offering. And maybe just that, but hey.
And also, I guess, I mean, one of the things that you are quite good at is feeding into some of the third parties, especially. So one of the things I'm always often getting told is I can't see in, say, Zap Map or WhatsApp app what the availability is of a charger, and also in car systems, which a lot of them are fed by people like plug surfing as well. So are you working to work with those amalgamators to make sure you've got that availability showing as well from the back office side?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have our availability in a number of these already, and we're currently working on adding that into others, such as plug surfing, to make sure that we're fully integrated. From our perspective, the more information you can give a driver and our customers, then the better informed they can be. What we don't want is somebody going out of their way to get to one of our chargers to find that they're all in use.
Yeah.
Particularly if they're running low on charge. So whilst I would rather people used our chargers than our competitors, above that, I would rather somebody could get to charge and get home.
Yeah, and one of the good things you've always done is you I think virtually everywhere you've got at least two chargers, which is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So on a lot of our sites, we do install two chargers, and we invariably make sure that even on the one charger sites, we've got the infrastructure in place that as demand increases, we're able to increase the number of chargers on that site. So it's important to us to make sure that not only are we building to the immediate future demands, but we also have the capability to expand as demand increases on those sites.
And am I right in remembering that you can use AC and DC at the same time on some of your chargers, so that two people could potentially charge? Yeah, which is not the case with some of your competitors.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that is a key thing, which is, we do have AC and DC. So if you do turn up and you're desperate and the charger is in use, there's usually the AC you can plug into if you need to. And also, there's a lot of people out there still driving the Renault Zoes and other cars that don't take the DC charging, and it just seems foolish to exclude those drivers from being able to use your network, because apart from anything else, they're usually smaller cars with smaller batteries, so are almost more likely to need that emergency charge. So I think it's important for us to not only have all options available, but being able to charge multiple vehicles at the same time is obviously.
But that, I guess that adds complexity to user interfaces again, though, because you've got to work out who you're dealing with. If someone's trying to stop the charge, you stopping the AC and stopping the DC.
Yeah, and I think that comes into the stop charge is probably where it gets a bit more complex. The start charge is very easy. You can just have a big button that you press, be it a virtual one on a screen or something else. But yeah, to stop charge, you do need to know who it is that you're stopping that charge for. So potentially at that point, you still need an A or B. What we tend to do at the moment, because you will have, you use an identifier to start that charge. So if I'm using a an RFID card to start it, then when I come to stop it, I have to identify myself with that RFID card, so nobody else can come and stop that charge. I have noticed on some of our competitors' stop and starts, you can just go straight up to it and stop it whilst you're walking past if you're feeling particularly malicious, or if you're just a curious person. And I'm sure you've seen enough tweets around people saying,
had happened.
It was turned off and unplugged, and I don't know who did it. So,
it definitely happens. And I think with most of your locations, because we are talking about places where you probably want to go in, have a drink, maybe have food, you're going to leave the car, whereas maybe some of your competitors are assuming you're going to stay with the car, which is I don't know, that's a reasonable assumption or not, but certainly for your ones, I definitely think having that locking in and not releasing them till.
Exactly. I think if you're charging at 50 kilowatts or below, you've got to assume that your drivers are likely to leave the vehicle. Because if you're only doing a 20-minute top up, you might stay in. But if you're doing anything more than half an hour, even if it's just to stretch your legs, go for a bit of a walk. So I think it is important that you ensure that a random stranger just walking past doesn't go around and just turn off all the cars that are charging.
So one of the things that I've always been really impressed with Engenie is your customer support, and I think that's one of the things which I think you really do really well. One question I do have coming up quite often with Engenie is the fact you've got two distinct different types of chargers, and that does confuse people occasionally. And I've certainly noticed recently that on the customer support people sometimes seem to get a bit confused about which one is which. Is there an easy way for people to identify which charger type they're on? I know what they are, but
so I think yes, it's a very good point. We have, I think it's out of our 168, I think it is as of today. It'll be more by next week. Chargers. I think we have 5 that are ABB units, and the rest are the circuit control units. So I think the challenge that our call center has is, as we get bigger, we need more people to manage those calls, so we have to bring new people in. And the number of calls that we get in, and the number of based on the number of charges we have, means that the bigger we get, the less of a percentage of calls are around the ABB units, which is not an excuse, but it does explain to some extent why there is a level of confusion. I think the easiest way, the chargers do actually have, our ABB chargers do actually have the ABB logo on the front. And I think the main difference is that they're big, black and rectangular, whereas the others are blue and orange and slightly wider and have the AC on the side. So they look a lot different. But obviously, if you're a driver and you're only using one on a regular basis, there's no real reason why you would understand the difference or know that there was a difference.
I've always wondered if it might be worth just putting a sticker on the front saying, please tell the customer support this is an ABB charger or something like that.
It's a good point, actually, and I don't see any reason why we wouldn't. Do you know what? I shall write that down.
I mean, as I said, your customer support are fantastic. They are one of the most responsive people groups I've known. I mean, sometimes on other chargers I've spent half an hour waiting for somebody to answer the call. Your guys seem to answer it almost immediately, which is, I think, is really impressive, and something I definitely encourage you to carry on doing. It's great. It's great.
And again, it's about putting the customer first. If I'm charging my car and I can't get a charge and I want to get home, then I need somebody to answer the call now, not send an email to me tomorrow morning. Because I don't want to be camping out in a car park overnight. So again, it's very important that we actually take into account the immediacy of queries when it comes to something as important as putting electricity into your mode of transport.
So one suggestion for your app, which has come up a couple of times, people, again, talking on the customer support side, is that sometimes the customer support struggles to know what actually is going on with the charger, and it'd actually be useful for them to see what's on the screen or see what's happening around the charger. the ability to send a photograph to customer support through the app is something I think some of your competitors are looking at, and I think it would be a really useful add-on for that sort of thing. It doesn't happen that often, but it's when you need it, you really need to be able to sort these things out.
It's a very good suggestion, and I don't want to give too much away, but it is something that we've already looked at in terms of having a more
Brilliant.
robust customer support interface within the app.
Excellent.
Because you're absolutely right. There's a lot of information that you would want to share. It might be videos, it might be photos, it might be geolocation, all sorts of other things that will help with making sure that we can resolve an issue quicker.
So one other thing we ought to really talk about is, which has been an issue with some of the locations of the charges, is icing. The fact that particularly where they're hotels and restaurants, and they're quite convenient locations, they do tend to get iced by other vehicles. I guess that's something you're aware of, and something I assume that's the location's real responsibility rather than yours, really.
Yeah, I mean, we do ask that our landlords try to be responsible around that, and a lot of places do have parking restrictions in. We do find that some of our partners are more responsive than others. I mean, we have a fantastic site just outside Westfield and Stratford International Car Park, and we have 6 bays reserved for EV charging. And they're very clearly signposted that they are only for EV charging. And they do have I mean, it's a multi-story car park, so they have somebody patrolling around. And we have no issues of icing there for obvious reasons. I think we're in a period of change, and it's a social change rather than anything else. And I think over the next couple of years, as people come to terms with the fact that EVs are here to stay, they're not the all evil type thing. Actually, it's a good thing. And you will always get somebody who's resistant to change and doesn't agree with it, or feels for whatever reason that they disagree with it. And I guess the hope is that we don't have to start going down the route of enforcing things. There are ways of doing that. I don't want to go down that route of starting to install ANPR cameras on every single charge point and then checking it against a database to see if it's an EV, and if it's not, issuing a fixed charge penalty notice. Nobody wants to go down that route, but the technology exists to do that if that ends up being a serious issue.
Yeah, I think most of the year it's absolutely fine. The time I particularly noticed it was around the Christmas meal period last year. I think I went to about five locations where all the charges were iced over that period, and before they'd always been clear and available. So it's and to be fair, in 2 of those cases, the landlords were really good at getting the cars moved, so you could get charged. But yeah, it's a frustration, and it's certainly one of those. Along with the usability, it's one of the big frustrations I think at the moment.
well, let's hope people settle into the fact that these things are here to stay and start being a little bit more considerate.
Indeed. So, are you an EV driver yourself?
So, not at the moment. I've got one on order. Unfortunately, the Polestar isn't yet here. So
yep, indeed.
So I'm waiting for it to arrive. But I've been driving EVs on and off for a while. Particularly enjoyed the iPace actually. Yep. So yes, I will be part of the clan soon. I live in North London, so driving tends to be for long distances anyway.
Yes, indeed.
The odd pop to the shops. But yes, I'm very excited to take a seat like that when it eventually gets over here.
You could experience some of those usability things yourself then.
Yeah, well, I do make an effort of actually getting a car occasionally and going for a bit of a drive to do exactly that, to actually experience it firsthand. And try different counties now and again, and not just using our own chargers, but actually everybody else's as well, just to see what the experience is, what it looks like, how easy it is to find the things, all these sorts of things.
Actually, that's a really good point. Signage is a major issue in some cases. I mean, certainly yours are actually fairly obvious because they used to be at the front of the car parks and obvious from the road.
I think we try to get them so they're relatively visible from the road anyway, but on top of that, we do have signage that sort of sits above at a quite high level. So where we've started installing in shopping centres, obviously the car parks are quite big. So to have something that sits over and above the height of a car that's relatively easily identifiable, it means you can do a quick scan of the car park and spot a relatively familiar sign and say, I recognise that. That's where it is, and drive over there.
I guess this is particularly challenging from the road's point of view, but one thing which I've often had commented to me is that there's a lot of charges just off the roads, not at the services, but they're very difficult to know that they're there when you're just driving down the road. You don't know, so you have to plan using the apps and things, which is actually a complexity that early adopters are fine with, but most general public people aren't going to want to do all that planning. Have you looked into the idea of signage from the main roads to your chargers, as a potential?
I think it's always a consideration. There reaches a point where there's a lot of work to be done with local authorities, the highways agency, etc., to add a sign in. And at this stage, I'm not sure there's a huge amount of appetite beyond the motorway charging, which we're all familiar with. Whether that's a good or bad thing, but so it is always something that we consider. I think one of the things we try to do is at least base ourselves nearby heavily travelled routes, even if it's not on the actual main road itself. And then we do, to some extent, rely on a little bit of using one of the common mapping partners, such as ZapMap, to identify where that is. But you're right. I think it is a challenge. I think if you were to do a parallel, which I don't like to compare us to petrol stations, but occasionally you absolutely have to. It is unusual that you will see a petrol filling station advertised from the side of the road now. Yeah. But I would say that if you were to go back to the 70s, 60s, maybe it was a bit more prominent.
Yeah.
I
always compare it with
quite old enough to remember.
Well, there's still I think quite a good comparative example, which is rural America. Whereas if you go on a freeway in rural America, you'll often see signs saying gas station off the road, hit this direction off this ramp, because they want to attract people off the ramps. And I think that's a good because they may be 4 or 5 miles off the ramp, but these still people will pull off because it's convenient and there's no other gas stations for miles. So
and as you say, I think there are occasions where you might be going. I mean, the A303 is a good example where you might see a sign to services, or maybe occasionally you'll see a sign to just a particular pub. Mm-hmm. So I think that there is an opportunity there, particularly if you are a little way off the road, to do that.
Local EV services or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think there's probably a prime example where I am. I'm in Peterborough. We've just had the new Ionities in the services, but your chargers are just about the same distance off the road as those are, just more difficult to find. And great chargers as well. Reliable heavily.
I mean, we're just trying to help you out by keeping them secret, so that
well, that's good. I won't tell anybody else. But that's I mean, because I haven't got home charging, I actually do rely on using your chargers very, very regularly. So I'm probably there every couple of days. Or I'm using less now because the car goes a bit further than it used to. With the updates, but and knowing that they're going to be there, they're going to work, they're reliable, come rain or shine, is really good. So I do. Again, that's coming back to the whole screen thing. That's the one problem I've had with them is last few days the sun's been very bright right on the screens, and actually difficult to read them. And I've actually taken.
You're using the ABB units then?
I am. Because
the AutoGate site.
Yeah, the AutoGate sites. So obviously we haven't got any of your nice new other chargers in Peterborough. But
have you had a chance to use one of the shiny?
Oh yeah, I do use those quite regularly as well.
I think one of the good things about that is definitely that the screen is slightly bigger, set back, and at an angle.
Yes, yeah, because you've got the slight shading at the top, haven't you? Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So there's a small canopy over the
yeah,
unit itself, and then the actual
yeah,
screen's recessed slightly. So
yeah,
it definitely makes it a lot easier to read.
yeah.
And it's a Spanish device, so they're quite used to the bright sunshine. Maybe less so the snow, but
And
but
the
yeah,
rain.
I mean it's I would say comparatively speaking, the new units are a lot more user friendly from a screen perspective.
Yeah, yes, you're right, because they do have that protection around them, which makes it a lot easier to use, and also in the rain as well. You don't get the water pouring down the screen, which you do on some of your competitors.
Yes, or down
Especially,
the back of your neck while you're desperately trying to
yeah,
download the app and scan
yeah,
the
yeah,
QR code for various other
yeah,
things.
yeah, which is great. Yeah. Well, James, thanks so much for your time today. This has been brilliant, and I think I've learned a lot. I hope the listeners have as well. So obviously, big plans coming up for the next year. Still loads more charges going, I understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Always moving forwards. We've got some exciting things in the pipeline, so I'm sure there'll be a few announcements before too long.
Oh, we'll
Maybe we could.
we'll catch up when we got those.
Good.
Brilliant. Thank you very
All right,
much.
Gary. Thank
Thanks.
you, mate.
I really enjoyed that interview. Lots of great information there, and James really seems to know what he's talking about, and definitely seems to have the consumer in mind, which is all good. So thank you very much for listening, and see you next time.